we watched Jason Lowery's episode. Jason Lowery is this United States military researcher, and basically, his current thesis is on Bitcoin proof of work as a projection of power technology. This was suggested by Ramon. Maybe Ramon, you could start our discussion with a question or your first discussion point that you want to bring up.
Ooh, okay. Well, yeah, I hadn't listened to it yet. By the way, when we asked when you
Okay.
asked for recommendations, but it was a good one. It's very similar to what his episode, his latest episode in the What Is Money show with Breedlove. And of course, Breedlove, his show having the format that it does. Jason went much more deep into the topic, but I thought that the Investors Podcast one was pretty good, especially as a starting point for a discussion like this. So, I mean, I guess he says a lot, right? Because he has to set up the stage so that we would be even a little ready to accept his thesis that when you use power or use energy or electricity, then it is essentially a defendable or defensible system, right? Um, like, but when people use abstract power hierarchies, meaning they just make it up and it's like a social structure, then you're likely to get abused in the long term. So he has to explain a lot, like history, kind of like how, what's that book, Sapiens, Yuval Harari did, right? He did a lot of setup. So I don't really know where I'm going with this. What's my question? I guess I'm kind of setting it up so that we can talk. Oh, hi there. Who's this? Shang. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you guys. Yeah, please continue.
So, well, I want to know what is it that struck you most, I guess, about, or how would you know? Maybe this is a better question. How would you summarize his thesis if you were to do it in like a paragraph?
Well, first of all, the proof of stake, this whole like abstract power projection, I used to just consider them to be institutions. Like that's the way I would describe them in the real world. I would just say, oh, the institutions of power. But it was pretty cool to hear him describe them as this like, okay, it's actually just abstract or virtual powered. Um, so yeah, that was pretty cool. If I were to summarize the thesis, it's that when you have abstract power go up against uh real physical power, um the physical power will overcome the abstract power, especially because, well, I mean, it has this whole thing where you can put any amount of, like, you can hold up any amount of defense for physical power versus for abstract power, like it's limited how much you can defend yourself with. I mean, the whole like proof of stake thing, I mean, it was a lot of mind-blowing shit, like um a lot of mind-blowing shit.
Right. It goes pretty deep, right? And that's what I guess I'm concerned, like sending this to someone who's just slightly interested in this stuff. It'll be hard to really absorb it. And I can't even say that I absorbed it all, right? But yeah, I would like to dive deeper and I guess flesh out a bit more the proof of stake side of this conversation. But let's push that till later. How would you summarize it in your words? Who wants to go next. And I don't know if you've all listened to the podcast.
Yeah, I've listened to
Go.
it. Go ahead.
You first. You're new, so you can.
Oh,
say
okay.
first.
I thought ladies first. No, actually, I wanted you to go first because I'm copying out. I'm actually trying to recall. I think I heard it like last week or something, so I forgot some of the content. My immediate impression is there's a little bit of overfitting, I think, especially on the power projection part. When what's the guy's name again? Jason, right? Jason mentioned something about you don't want to use force to hurt the other person. It's just more of like saying that, hey, back off, right? Or more like threatening. So it didn't really jive with me immediately. So that was the part that I think is a bit overfitting. Other than that, it's a very interesting take, especially on his understanding of the use of force and power, as well as historically how it's being approached. No, now that is very interesting. Yeah, but that's what I have for the moment. I have to actually go through some of the key highlights right now, and maybe I can recall some of the points.
Yeah, he does talk about a lot, so sure. Steph.
Well, I have just like bits and pieces from what Raphael and Shang said. Um, I think it's the same for me. Like, what struck me was this whole thing about abstract powers or like institutions that we have versus, like the concrete physical things. There are parts where he talks about like the spoon isn't real and all those things. And I think it was interesting how he kind of like how he framed things in a certain way. Because, I mean, we all live despite or because of or maybe influenced by the institutions that we have today, whether or not they are, whether or not we realize that they are abstract, everything to us, everything that we go through, it just feels real. And it was, I don't know, I like that he was able to sort of, kind of draw a line between the abstract stuff that, that we go through or that we see or experience in our daily lives versus the tangible. And I like that he kind of goes into like the politics of it, I guess, because or maybe not politics, but like just the more like application in the daily life. Because I think for like at least for me, like with my like introduction to Bitcoin, which is through Raphael, I feel like it was just like a bunch of dots and just connecting the dots of like politics being bullshit and then hard money and it's just, like that was the trajectory. And like I don't always see that in, well, it's not like I listen to a lot of Bitcoin podcasts, but I feel like in the podcasts that I've listened to at least here before, um I don't think anyone beside like before this podcast really showed it outside of economics, because I think the previous videos that we had was just like,
Yeah.
okay, economics, but then nothing to do with like like, okay, let's get out of that school, that discipline, right? And how we behave or like how we perceive things, how we interact with each other. So yeah, it was really interesting to have that. And like finally something that's like, I don't know, just like really shows that the establishments that we have are abstract. Like, I don't know, I just liked hearing that, because at least for me, I get very, I don't know, pessimistic, or like I despair easily whenever I think of like, these establishments being so formidable. They've been here for years and then they're just getting stronger. And then no, they're just abstract. So it's like, okay, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna try to like, even if my examples are wrong, I'm gonna give them and correct me if you think I'm mistaken. I know you're not Jason Lowery, right? But if you think I'm not using it correctly, um, please do correct me. Now I'm giving these examples so that it becomes easier to I guess know what we're talking about, right? Because again, I mean, not to overuse the word abstract. If it remains abstract in our conversations, we might be talking about completely different things. So okay, so uh, the way I see it, like an abstract power hierarchy would be something, and I think he may have even mentioned this, something like a king or a royalty, right? Like any day, the people could have a revolution, and they would be able to overpower the palace guards and um, even the army of the king. So it is, but the power is there because they believe in the king, right? And they believe in this structure and what it stands for, and like that, their nation and whatever, their like all of that, even stuff like Yuval Noah Harari talks about. They all lend to this structure that the king or the royalty has over the people. But a real one would be when people do decide to have a revolution, then they can, in a way, like defend themselves, right? They can overthrow. Am I still making sense so far? So the abstract would be like royalty, the real one, the non-abstract or like the real power projection would be like an army, or if the majority of the people decide to stage a revolution of some kind. And so he likens real power projection to mining. And this one I'd like to dive into a bit more, like proof of work mining and abstract power hierarchies using, or he likens it to proof of stake, right? And they played the clip there of Vitalik saying like it's a virtualized world where they did, right? That was the podcast.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, they did. He played a section of what I can't remember exactly which section was that what Vitalik said. In fact, you're quite right. Maybe I can chime in. Interestingly, I actually written some notes that I have. Let's see. So for those of you who haven't listened to his podcast, right? So the parts that I totally agree on, and probably also relates to Sapiens, would be his talk about abstract idea and creation of symbolic language. Now that one is very interesting. It's like how you have, how you create symbolic language, and then you can use it to actually, change the state of a computer, right? So that section, that part, if you're not of a computer science background, that will be very interesting for you. If not, any of you here a computer science background? All of you? No, Steph? Yeah, Steph, you've listened to it, right? You heard the podcast? Yeah, great. Yeah, so that part is very good. It's a good refresher for me because I'm not of computer science background and I forgot all about it. And listening to it again, it's like, oh yeah, it makes sense again. And the other section that would be very interesting, I think for the rest of the audience, is still muted. So if anyone want to chime in, you can always chime in. Is I think I got a quote or a inspiration for a tweet out of this that probably would make sense, right? Which is that Bitcoin essentially is a conversion of energy into Bitcoin, right? It's almost like converting lead into gold, if that makes sense to you, right? That makes sense to me at the moment, right? So I got the inspiration for that quote. So it's like converting energy into Bitcoin is like converting lead into gold, right? If you understand computer science, it's basically using proof of work. You are taking energy and you're converting it if I'm using this right, cryptographically or guessing right into a form, right, which is a string and whatnot, right, or an hash or something like that. So I thought, oh, okay, that is very interesting, right? So that's how you actually tie it into the real world. Now with proof of stake, it doesn't really have that. So that's where at the last part of the podcast, it sounds like without that tie to the real world, right? So a lot of this is almost like a loop, and it is the token holders will be the one that, or in this case, it will be very politicized. That particular blockchain will be very politicized rather than grounded to the reality. Okay, so I'll stop here for now before I start babbling, and then I'll look at the rest of my notes and I'll add in.
Yeah, because I feel like everything we say is just, it has so much information there. Like even with the podcast, like you could take us a minute, and it was so dense with ideas, right? So I think we also have to take it slowly and try and break it down. And if there's something not clear to you, and someone's saying it, just ask, right? Be the idiot interviewer, essentially. That's why I like Peter McCormack, because he's not afraid to be that. So okay, so let's try and play out the scenario then. Okay, proof of work, proof of stake. You have proof of work, which is power projection or real power, and then proof of stake, which is abstract power hierarchy, because it doesn't really exist. It's not reusing energy. But with proof of work, how would you defend it then? And with proof of stake, how would you defend it also, right? So let's play out the scenario. Like proof of work, let's say there's a group of miners reaching 51%, and we want to defend it. Like how would we do so?
So I think you defend that by increasing your hash rate. So you can defend it by I guess buying more miners to compete, and therefore you can increase that hash rate by as much power projection as you can. And so in the real world, that means you have the manufacturing capacity and the energy capacity to basically drive those hash rate up, right? And so that's like real power that you can't come up with unless you actually had it. Versus proof of stake, which is simply a majority rules sort of democracy style system, where as soon as there is a majority stake, well, I don't want to say as soon as it's definitive because I'm not an expert, but it sounds like as soon as you have a majority stake, then the game is won, essentially, and you cannot reverse back from that. And that was actually a pretty fundamental realization that, hey, the game in a proof of stake system is to gain majority, and then that's it. Like you basically at that point you've corrupted the blockchain, and you can't defenders can't overcome it from that point on. And so the fact that there is an end goal or an end state in proof of stake makes it actually much more vulnerable versus proof of work, where there is no end state because it's constantly always a hash war. And I think he had this quote. It was I hope I wrote it down. It was like hash war versus something else. I'll get it. I'll type it down or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna this assumes people, like the conversation that Jason had assumes that people know how proof of work mining works. And that's a big topic in its own. But I would like to thanks to Steph, I would like to try and summarize it, I guess, in a few sentences. So proof of work was invented by this guy called Adam Back, right? And what he wanted to do was essentially solve spam. And I think his was specifically in email. And so if he said, hey, instead of making email super cheap to send, what if like the one sending email had to like prove that they spent a bunch of CPU cycles to do so? So they spent electricity to do so. And then when they send an email, you can see that, hey, yeah, they did actually work on it. They're not just making it up. So I'm going to accept this email into my server. So Satoshi took that and he put that on Bitcoin. But essentially, what proof of work is the to make the or to win the lottery and mine the next block. A miner needs to make a bunch of guesses. So it's like a lotto where you just keep guessing, and if you get the right, I'll just call it a number, but it's really a string of letters and numbers. If you get the right one, then you win. You get to create the block. You essentially you get to define what the next block is, and then you submit it to everybody else, and everyone else that has your block, they have this long number that you submitted, and it's easy for them to verify that you did the work. Just like in Adam Back's implementation, the one receiving the email can easily verify that you did the work to find this number. So just like a lotto, the more guesses you have, the higher your chances of winning. Same with miners. So a hash is that long string of letters and numbers. That's what the hash is. I don't know why it's called hash, but it is in computer science. And why they want to add more and more machines is so that they can have more guesses per second. And I think it's something ridiculous, like peta hashes per second is the count now. I don't even know how many zeros that is. I forgot. I won't be able to tell you.
Thanks, Ramon.
Sure. So did you find your
So it
slash
was
wars versus hash wars?
It was slash
Yes.
wars versus hash wars. He was basically commenting on oh hey G Sky. He was basically commenting on like the slashing work system in proof of stake, which has all the same issues that we have today with like I guess typical democracy stuff. So yeah, there were three issues. How to verify that? First of all, how do you verify this that the stake is decentralized? Because a central authority can divide his stake into infinite number of validators. So
Yeah.
The validators you think are the individual like decentralized nodes, but how do you know that they're not colluding with one another and they're actually the same thing? And the second one was
because they put like this limit of or
right
32 or 64 ETH or something like that to have a validator. And when I've asked people online, like, how do you know that it's gonna be distributed? And they're like, well, you know, how do you know, like, if I have 100 that I don't make 2 or 3 and then pretend to be different? And people couldn't answer really. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you won't even know if you won't even know that you're under attack in the first place. You won't know that someone is secretly collecting all the stake in the background until it's possibly too late. Yeah, the other two issues were how do you achieve consensus that the sanction is bad, and then the last one is slashing works both ways and it can be used against honest stakers.
So yeah, I mean, because it's all just social consensus, how do you know that when the attacker has enough, I don't want to use power because that has a different meaning in this conversation, influence, right? I think that's a good term, in the network, then how do you know they won't use it to, I don't know, vote and slash others that are honest? I don't know. And what's worse in my opinion, and no one seems to have also given me comforting a comforting answer, is that every time there's a hack, even if it's because fine, someone was running an exchange and the exchange got hacked, it's not really ETH's fault, or someone wrote a smart contract and there was a bug. It's not ETH's fault, it's the smart contract maker's fault. Every time that there's a hack like that, these people suddenly get ETH and they can stake and they can be validators, right? So it's almost saying like, hey, I'm gonna go hack miners, and if I'm able to do so, their hardware will disappear and appear in my place. And not just that, so will their electricity, right? I'll have access to their electricity forever. And how do you defend against that?
Yeah, and at the same time, they get larger share of control on the network. So
Sure.
yeah, when they're stealing these assets, you're also stealing control of the network.
Yeah.
On top of the monetary value. Yeah, that's basically what you said.
Yeah. Every time, so it's like what gets stolen goes to already a dishonest actor, right? And so the likelihood that they're not going to be good validators is higher than your regular person that has 32 ETH. At least that's what I imagine. So a lot of question marks. Just say I also wouldn't know how to counter it, because they say, if someone, this is what I hear also very often, if somebody wants to take over the network, then they're gonna have to buy ETH. Why do you assume they're gonna have to buy? Right? They say you're gonna have to buy ETH, and the price of ETH will go up, so it'll become harder and harder to buy ETH. Why do you assume they're gonna buy? Why can't they just steal? I'm not asking you guys. It's
Well, okay. So, and the other thing that this whole like buying thing as a protection mechanism, right? Like if the price goes up, then it would be like really difficult to get a stake of it, and basically nobody can get more than 50%, because the price would be so high if someone were try to make an attack like that. But then Jason makes this point, which is you can print fiat to buy these assets, and so if you have a control of the money printer, then you can easily mount an attack like that, which you couldn't do for something like Bitcoin. Like you can buy all the Bitcoin you want, but it's not going to give you more control of the network. But with proof of stake, you can print all the money you want, all the fiat you want, use that fiat to mount an attack. This is not the fiat that you're printing is not tethered to power. I mean, like this whole watts thing, power, the same way Bitcoin is. And so you're just porting over like power from the other abstract power projection. You're like warp tunneling it to gain power on the Ethereum abstract power projection.
And what I really like, and he didn't mention this in the podcast, about Jason's, like the way he approaches it. He says, don't think about attacking a proof of work system at how much money it would cost, because you're looking at it the wrong way. Essentially, you measure it in watts, right? Because when you think about it in money, you're like, oh, okay, what is it now? 3.25. Let's say 5 Bitcoin per block, right? In an hour, 5 times 6, 30 Bitcoins. You're like, okay, $75 million with the current price. So if I had $100 million, I could attack Bitcoin. No! You need to find energy that's cheap enough. You need to have all the ASICs so that you can run the hashes. And because if you just get your ASICs and plug it in the grid, you're not going to have the same like wattage, you won't be able to direct the same amount of hashes, right? For the same price, right? You're gonna like you'll have to go against the people who are getting energy for essentially free.
To answer Tom's question in the chat, I think it's close to the order of tens of thousands or thousands, somewhere around there.
And it's
However,
just how many nodes there are.
yeah, how many nodes? However, they are pooled together. I think I forgot what were the numbers, but there were only like I think top 3 mining pools. Coinbase is one of them. I know Lido is definitely one of them, and the pools, the validator pools, are a little bit different from Bitcoin mining pool, as I understand, is because as you previously mentioned, right? So it's a bit different because like what Jason mentioned, they are in their own literally reality. So and then if you have a lot of fiat, right? So for example, you have a lot of US dollars, you could very quickly buy up the tokens. And I think one of the more insightful ones was he mentioned how you can circumvent, I don't know whether this or a mix up in a podcast, you can circumvent the slashing if you just do a sort of like a cyber attack or something. Means you actually have many validator nodes, you just spread it out, so it's actually much more difficult for you to for the attacker to get slashed, right? Because then you have to slash a lot, then there's an issue, then the whole committee will have to decide to fork, right? Because it's just so hard. So that's one of the challenge. So that's one of the challenge with it. And another thing,
I just want to try and summarize what you're saying is because when you're directing, when you want to slash, you say, okay, someone's not acting right. You want to slash them so they lose some ETH. But with a Sybil attack, meaning I might have, let's just make it round, let's say 320 ETH, so I can have 10 validators. And I don't have to tell anybody that they're all mine. So it looks like they're all different. So if I get slashed, I'll just lose at most a tenth of my validators, right?
Yeah. So one of the reasons why if you follow the ETH forums and you look at, I think recently Vitalik made a proposal to split the. Are you familiar with PBS, proposer builder separation? Have you heard of the terminology?
Yeah.
So it is still very far off, right, for them to actually implement this. So because there is an issue where they say, proposer will have a centralized power. So Vitalik recently made I haven't read his post, but essentially it's just splitting it even further, right? So it means splitting the powers of the proposer a little bit further. I forgot what were the details already, and it made sense. However, if you notice, there's actually a trend in the entire value chain of proof of stake for Ethereum, in a sense that it only started out with just validator nodes or mining nodes, and then now you start seeing that you have searchers, then you have validators, and then now you have searchers, you have MEV boosts, then you have validators, and then after that later on you have searchers, relayers, a number, and a few more, and then proposer and builder, right? And then they say that's a part, but I think as they start realizing there's more problem, they will start splitting. So this is more like a defeat in detail. If you study history, how Napoleon actually defeat. Yeah, so you actually defeat in detail, meaning you say you do check and balances, and then you have so one party cannot control each other. However, then there will be like one source of congestion, and with drawing parallel to the real world, if you look at, say, the supply chain issues that we've been having, right? It would be like, oh no, you can just diversify. However, there is actually economies of scale, right? And there would naturally be centralizing factors as well. Just like how the silicon chips you have, the equipment manufacturers are centralized in only a few countries. I think Netherlands was one of them, or Dutch, one of the Dutch countries, right? And then so you will see naturally there will be centralization. So this is the same issue with the proposer, because I believe they need some very strong computing power to actually make sure that the proposed bundle of transactions doesn't clash with each other. Yet they don't exactly know the content. They only know the fees in, I think, what they call it, the header, yeah, at the very top there. So they just know the fees, right? So they don't know, but then they have to run some very strong. So that you need computing power. Probably only a few actors in the whole world that could actually do that. So those are some of the unsolved issues yet with proof of stake on Ethereum, and yeah, and I think they still have a lot of work to do. Yeah, I don't think they can solve it that
Yeah.
easily. Not that I'm a computer science expert.
Yeah, and yeah, I do have a computer science background. Sure, it's not in distributed systems, but one thing is common all over: keep it simple, right? And this is not proof of stake is not simple. They're just trying to recreate things that you essentially get for free when you use electricity, right? When you have proof of work. Um,
Oh,
yeah.
talking about that, one of the thing is, there's been a lot of hype with the merge, right? Where they say, oh, after the merge, there will be 90% decrease in the tokens issuance or Ethereum issuance, right? So that is fair and well, and it's true. However, after you see that there's a drop, you don't see the raise in the price of Ethereum, right? So as proportionally increase, right? So there's actually right now a decoupling between the fiat with crypto, right? Obviously because it's risk on and whatnot. So on the economics perspective, right, there could be a chance where it's easier to actually for a bad actor to actually come in to actually buy up Ethereum. Although yes, as the more they buy it, the price of Ethereum would increase, but they can do it over the counter. It means they don't have to go through exchanges, and you wouldn't know, things like that would happen, right? So then they could actually have a huge influence. That's one thing. The other thing is it's probably harder to actually attack Bitcoin in this case. Obviously, we've seen what happened with China last year, but also you can't directly buy into it, right? You have to actually convert, get the nodes, get the mining equipment and whatnot. So you actually have to do a lot more things. So the probability of failure is actually much lower with proof of work. That's why, in my opinion, that is better. But nonetheless, I don't want to deviate from what Jason is mentioning. So a lot of Jason points are actually quite good. I forgot what it is because I agree and I didn't remember.
Yeah. As before we continue, I'll read this out just in case people are listen to the recording of this one. Tom asks, since there are only thousands of nodes running on ETH, do the nodes on ETH have the authority to oppose changes made on the network? Yeah, I mean, this is what I hear. It's like, well, first of all, there are different kinds of nodes. It's like you have archival nodes and, nodes that don't really keep all the history. But let's just say they're all like full nodes. Let's just assume that for simplicity's sake. Yeah, they're still, they could still check, right? The validators don't set the rules really. They're in a sense like they are like miners, where they could just say, yeah, this is the block I'm creating. Although it gets a bit complicated because you have these proposers and all that stuff and relays, and I haven't caught up with the literature on this anymore. But essentially, yeah, if you're running a node, you have some, I guess you could say, some say, just like if you're running a Bitcoin node, as to what you accept as a valid node, right? 2K? Yeah, 2K is not a lot. Yeah, anyway, so let's. I want to go back so that we don't lose sight. So it's kind of clear, like with proof of stake, it's hard to defend because once they have it, right? And you can't even just slash somebody for stealing ETH. You can only slash if they're not behaving, if they decide to validate it and they're not behaving like a validator you think is a good validator, right? So, but with proof of work, sure, it might be difficult, but I can imagine that if push comes to shove and people really wanted to defend the proof of work network, then they could be running it on their shitty laptops and their GPUs and be able to muster something, right? Even if it is a loss. And second, um, this is kind of an aside already. I think using residual heat from Bitcoin miners is an excellent way to decentralize it even more. Because you're like, damn, every time I'm gonna turn on my aircon, because you can cool. I learned you can run an aircon with residual heat. Every time I turn on my miner to run the greenhouse, because I live in a cold country, for example, or I'm heating the pool, or I'm heating my water for my shower, you are defending the network. And I'd love to see more of that, actually.
Um, well, I have something we can discuss, which is there's a point in the discussion where he asked about MIT and how did the, I guess, academic circle react to the kind of research he was doing. And, I know this is trend where somehow Ethereum and proof of stake is more popular with like the mainstream slash academic, that type of scene, I guess. And it was kind of interesting
Yeah.
because the way he described it was that, well, if you think about it, these institutions are abstract projections of power. And so naturally they would tend towards the, digital version of that, which would be proof of stake. So yeah, it was like, okay, his model basically makes even that like, oh, that's a pure phenomenon or peculiarity. Wouldn't you say? Like, why is it that the academics and whatever they're in line with proof of stake and Ethereum, and you realize, oh, it's actually because they're the same power projection. Uh, yeah, that was
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah, I remember he said that. Although I wouldn't have gone, I guess, as far as put that together. I have a feeling that you just assume, and when you don't look at it deeply, just like, oh wow, Bitcoin uses a lot of energy. Yeah, and I'm from a university, so I it's very much to be um popular. Like it's popular to lessen energy and let's be more efficient, right? So so I could see why that if that just that reason alone, I could see why that they would prefer proof of stake. It might be just as simple as that, actually. Or maybe, I mean, who knows? But it's cool though. Like he got his thesis advisor, right? Um, someone who's well versed in security, and but she doesn't believe in Bitcoin. And he's like, okay, perfect. So if I can convince you, then that means I'm doing a good job, right? So that was pretty cool. Um, yeah. Questions? Anything else you want to mention?
There's something else. I like the black powder analogy that he made, where apparently when black powder was invented, it was invented by a guy who was a doctor, and so it was marketed as medicine and for like
Yeah.
a decade or 2 decades.
Yeah.
I was like, that's perfect.
Yeah, I think the Chinese emperors were searching for the longevity pill or something. Yeah. The one time they even tried mercury, so I don't know.
What about it struck you? Like
Well,
the fact that it was called medicine and people thought it was medicine and tried to
yes,
use it as medicine.
yes, because his point was for Bitcoin, just because we put coin in it doesn't make it like a finance thing purely. And for him, Bitcoin is a power projection technology in cyberspace. That's a big picture, and money happens to be one of the one of those useful use cases. It's just that we focus on that because we put coin in it. And so his example was gunpowder, which is also a power projection technology, but because it was invented by a doctor and we was sold as medicine, for a long time, people didn't realize, hey, this shit's actually really useful as power projection tool. So the technology had been invented, right? But we didn't realize its capabilities. Same with Bitcoin. Yeah.
I get the black powder thing, although I can't seem to make the connection. What else would we have used if it was called BitHash? What would you use it for? I don't know.
It should have been called bit power projection in terms of physical watts coin. Yeah. He's not saying. I don't think he's saying like, I mean, we had to call it something, and he's just saying we have to be aware that just because we have a semantic name for it doesn't mean that that's all it is.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. But I think also one thing that is a bit, or that can confuse maybe me at times, it's like there's also not a clear delineation with like abstract power and real power projection, because if you have one, you can kind of build abstract power, and then you can also use that abstract power to gain enough influence to actually power project, right, with watts. So it's like they can feed on one another. Like, for example, again, examples. You can become king by being a leader of the revolution, and then you instate yourself as king, and then you ensure everybody believes that what you're fighting for is true, so that they won't be able to, or that they will choose not to throw you over. And by virtue of being king, you can gather resources and project power that way also, right? So it's like they affect one another. And I guess with something like a POS system, maybe ETH, the way that would happen is they would project power by, I don't know, lobbying.
I can give an example, Raman. When you use king, and then Steph was also mentioning about Game of Thrones, right? And then Tom was asking about whether the nodes. So I can tie it all together with a very interesting example, which is that so say for example the developers, right? So as you know, in the Ethereum developers, they actually introduced time bomb, right? I think right after the DAO hack. So yeah. So basically, what it essentially does is, if we're going to upgrade, and if you don't follow, we're just going to enable a time bomb. So the only way is you just fork, right? Fork the chain, right? So now that's why we have ETH POW and the ETH that we have. There's another thing that is an issue that's mostly probably related to having virtual machines, which is that in the case of ETH, they already have a huge DeFi ecosystem on top of it, right? And the huge DeFi ecosystem is very much powered by abstract power. So what's the abstract power? Which is the stable coins. And the stable coins are fiat backed. So essentially, the stable coins like USDC, they are sort of like the kingmaker. Going back to the Game of Thrones example for Steph, right? So to answer Tom's question, right, it's a bit more nuanced. It's not like in the block wars where the nodes just say no, and then you don't, most of the nodes say no, and then Bitcoin doesn't fork in that case, right? In the case of ETH, right, if for example the next day the developers say no, we'll fork, and then the stablecoin says no, we don't agree with this fork, we want the old one, you have a problem, because you can fork,
right?
You have a copy or duplicate of the smart contracts in the fork, but
right.
Essentially the tokens or the stablecoins in that new fork, right, will have no value, because the fiat is 1-to-1 backed, right? So you can't split it like 50 cents. So then you have a lot of issue. Then the community will split like, oh god, which the nodes will be like, which code base should we follow, right? Should we if I'm a node, if I'm a DeFi project, and then I run nodes, right? Oh, I probably have to follow the stablecoin guys, right? Versus the other. So it's
Yes,
very
you make a good point. And although I'll also say that Bitcoin will face the same issues, like when the stable coins become big enough.
of course.
And I think they will on Bitcoin eventually.
Do you see? Sorry to cut in. Is there like a huge DeFi or stablecoin use in Bitcoin right now?
No, not there isn't. But I am making a bet that it will be with stuff like Taro and RGB. So that's essentially you can issue tokens, and then they can also be used over the Lightning Network. I'm simplifying, but they can be used over the Lightning Network.
Maybe for Raphael's Raphael asked what is RGB and Taro. RGB is called the colored coin. So actually, I'm doing my research on RGB and Taro right now. I'm very interested in this. So RGB stands for colored coin. It was created in 2013, I believe, even by Vitalik, if I'm not wrong. Vitalik actually started out with RGB. So he actually wanted to build like layer 2 on top of Bitcoin. But somehow, for some reason, for technical challenges, which definitely is beyond me, due to I think a UTXO or something related to it, it doesn't make sense. The community doesn't like it. So he then pivoted to Ethereum or did his own thing. Is that correct, Ramon? Do you remember?
I don't know if he worked on colored coins, but RGB, maybe they got their name, or their name was influenced by the Colored Coins project, but it's a different effort. RGB was, I guess, designed in a sense by Peter Todd and Giacomo Zucco, and there's this Maxim guy who's like the main one pushing it forward. But essentially, RGB allows you to create tokens and like smart contract. I'll just call them smart contracts, but not in the same way as ETH, right? It's a bit different. And they can run on Lightning, right? So that's why I expect it to get big, because that means, hey, if you have a stable coin on Lightning, then you can have a wallet that has, let's say, a peso stablecoin and uses the Lightning Network to send it around, and you didn't have to ask for permission from the government to create the wallet.
Correct. And I think RGB is suing Taro because they're saying that Taro stole the idea. I don't know where I heard or what I read it. Did you see it?
I heard that too. I didn't hear about suing, but I heard that Taro, before they adopted the name Taro, was called CMYK. So for the ones who are familiar with the colors,
correct.
Yeah,
correct.
CMYK is I think the terminology in when you print you use CMYK.
Yes, something about
screen you use RGB.
Yes, exactly. However, some very influential thought leaders in Bitcoin, right? Is it? I think Antonov.
Yeah.
Antonov, he doesn't think that it will work though. He doesn't think Taro will work. Because actually you have to pay his Patreon to actually hear him share that opinion. Yeah, so I'm one of his patrons, so I actually paid, and then he had a podcast a few days ago, and I listened in, and he doesn't think that Taro would work because it's very similar to colored coins, which he then said colored coins doesn't work. So there are security implications, and then also but let me I should explain a little bit more, right? So this is what I understand. So colored coins is like, as you know, as you transfer sats, right, to one another, or Bitcoin to one another, right? So you have the UTXO model, right? So what colored coin essentially does is you take that one, assuming that you take one sat, and one sat is like a $1 bill, and then you put an Apple stock on top of it. Right, so you put a stamp that says this $1 bill is now, worth an Apple stock, because an Apple stock is essentially non-fungible token or fungible, depending on how you view it, right? But you're adding more value on top of it. You're adding DeFi, and then it's just the problem with this is that now that $1 bill is $1 and or plus the price of the Apple stock, and then this actually incentivizes a lot of probably miners to collude, right, and to attack it. How would they do that? I don't know. I'm still doing my research, but I think this would be a bigger issue on the Lightning Network, because if you're building Taro on top of the Lightning Network, and Lightning Network is off chain, and if you don't have watches or something like that, I'd imagine that would be an issue. So I haven't gone to very deep, and I'm doing a bit of research. If any of you have more insights on this, please share with me. I'm still trying to read the code base of Taro, and I don't have the time yet. That's one of the reasons why I'm skeptical of why Taro would work. But the idea of Taro, like what you're saying, Ramon, I'm very optimistic about it, very bullish about it. But I'm doing research on the security implications.
Yeah, update us. But yes, I mean, like that problem, if it does get big enough on Bitcoin, it'll also be a problem. So it's like kind of this abstract power hierarchy kind of bleeding onto Bitcoin and on a proof of work system, right?
On the pro side, though, you will see that that I think that's very interesting, because not only you have NFTs or fungible tokens, but then this could also mean that some Lightning nodes can choose to be censorship oriented or whatnot, right? Or follow certain rules, right, within certain geographical location, and it'll be fine, because then it doesn't touch Bitcoin, but the Lightning Network itself, you have certain nodes that follow certain regulations, and then it sounds very similar to the internet right now that we have, because we do have geographical region based firewalls or censorship. So I think it makes sense to me, but it doesn't break the blockchain, right? Like in Ethereum's case, they still work in progress, and then they put VM on top of it, and then now they're gonna break it, right? Because they added the VM. But that's just my thought.
You brought up NFTs, and it just reminded me of this idea I had, which is NFTs are also kind of like proof of abstract power projection. So a lot of the value of NFTs comes from your proof of value, or like your value in society. You know how, like, oh, if you have if you have certain ape NFTs, then you're part of some kind of, I guess, exclusive club or whatever. And when he was talking about like rank and how humans create these system of hierarchies, and those hierarchies are like delineated usually with like titles, I kind of got reminded of NFTs used in the same way. And it's sort of like, oh, look at the NFTs I own, therefore I'm someone in the crypto space, I'm influential, talk to me. And it's kind of replication again of that abstract proof of power again, which you can use fiat to buy or whatever. Like,
yeah. So I don't also see that abstract power hierarchies are a bad thing. I mean, like I think that they have their place. I don't think that we would have gotten perhaps as far as we have without us believing in stories. Like no Yuval Noah Harari says, it's like humans are the only ones that can get millions of people to have a goal and go for it. Right? No other species has been able to do that before. And we do that through stories, essentially. And that's what abstract power hierarchies is. But if we are gonna have a censorship resistant, permissionless thing, I don't see how it can be based on something that is built on abstract power hierarchies. Like it'll have to be like real power projection, right, to defend it. And that's why I think proof of work is the way to go.
Yeah,
I think. Oh,
and
go on. Sorry.
no, you can go.
Just like maybe small things to add. When Ramon talked about stories, because I was thinking about it. When we think of like abstract power projection, that's also religion and like the spiritual stuff, right? Or even art, which is also stories. Like these are also abstract, and I think the way that they're able to be passed down or even consumed, especially for something like religion, or even like your I don't know, like your judicial system, for example. Like all these things have their like imagery and rituals, right? It can't, like, I think maybe in the beginning when these things were formed, the people knew they were abstract, and they had to be grounded by virtue of, I don't know, changing your clothes, or like using certain words or languages when you're in a certain space, for example, or in a certain mode. um and well, I'm not sure if, like, if people are aware, especially people who are there. I don't know if they're aware that these things are still abstract, or it's like, you feel a certain validation because you wear, I don't know, a certain kind of coat, for example, or those things, or like you have a pin or a badge, right? But those things, like, it's just a badge, but like, I don't know, I think it's maybe like also human nature to venture to, or to be attracted to that abstract thing and want to like ground it, because I mean it's what we've been doing. I think it's what humans have been doing for so
Yeah.
long. There's that natural curiosity. But yeah, I think the problem arises when you know um when you use it to corrupt, and it's so easily corruptible.
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, we'll always. I think we won't progress also if we don't use abstract power hierarchies in one form or another. But I think they have their place also. You know, and he didn't say that, but I think he'd agree there. And by he, I mean Jason. And where that belongs is not in money or bit hash or whatever they called it.
I agree with that. Like, you know, abstract power projection is useful, especially because it is energy efficient and it avoids accidents, and I guess generally promotes harmony. It is useful, but I'm not sure I agree that it is necessary to have built the society that we have today, or like the technology we have today. I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that like everything we have here is thanks to these hierarchies. Um, but it could very well be despite of having these hierarchies existing. Um, so like, usually if you make the argument like, okay, we should get rid of the state or whatever, then the argument I would hear against that is like, well, we wouldn't have all of this technology, all of this progress, if not for the state, which is another way of saying if not for these
Yeah.
abstract.
And it's not. I think companies are abstract power hierarchies,
Mm.
right? You know, so it's not necessarily state or government. It's just
Yes.
structures that we make in our mind, like these spoons that doesn't exist. That and tying it back to that, like schools, they don't exist. You have a building, you have kids that go in a building, and a person talking to them and teaching them stuff, but the school doesn't exist. But and so like the ETH and the stake, it doesn't exist. It's not real. But the hashes do. The what's needed to create them exist. So, and I think that's what he meant.
I'll throw a curveball and sort of say, maybe this is also kind of my feelings sometimes when I was watching the podcast. Like, isn't it funny how it's kind of hard for us naturally, I suppose, to know if something is real or not? Like, I don't know, like for example, when he had to say that, oh, these abstract things or institutions that we have, the hierarchies, like they're not real, right? Um, but then I think I think there are certain things in the material world that I think it's easy to discount or to be ignorant of the reality. Like, you know how like there's this like Buddhist, I don't know if it's like a, what do you call those, like brain teasers, where if you have a cup and it's actually wrong to say that, if the cup does not have any liquid in it or any solid in it, like it's still wrong to say that the cup is empty, because the cup has air, right? And air is matter and it has all these molecules and stuff like that. But it's like, I mean, if we didn't know science, if we didn't know enough about the material world, there are things I think that we would not realize is real. I don't know if that makes sense. But I think what we perceive as real, I think this is what I'm trying to say. Like what we perceive as real is quite malleable. I think, like,
Yes. Yeah.
like it's easy. Like, okay, sorry to like to throw something darker, like I think he had this example with War, about like the he said the Gettysburg rifle story, um, and how like with warfare, like it's become like the warfare now is worse because people don't even see each other anymore, right? So they don't
Mhm.
even see like the real human at the other end
Yeah.
of the plane, whatever, right? And I don't know. I mean, I think it's an issue or a weakness of ours that we can easily lose sight of what is real just because maybe we don't see it, or maybe because of like propaganda, and then we think that because this institution says that these group of people are, I don't know, are pigs or weird or whatever, like insert slur words here. It's so easy to just dehumanize them. So yeah, I just think it's interesting, fascinating, weird that what we think is real is so, like, I don't know, like we don't have like a good sense of it like all the time. It's not 100% accurate.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure what the curveball is there, but yeah. And I think it's just the nature of also of our language, right? It's also very imprecise, and in a sense, putting a word on something makes it more real. But I think what what like the level that Jason is talking about when he means real is like, is that thing actually physically there? You know, a bullet, yes. Watts, yes. Steak, no. And when it's not there, then it is also subject to change amongst the group that has the most influence. One thing that so Vitalik, um, he he named like the smallest unit of Ethereum. We call it in Bitcoin. We call the smallest unit is Sat, right, or Satoshi. But they named the smallest one Wei, so it's after a scientist. And I think Nick, gosh, name escapes me right now, but the guy that essentially invented smart contracts, right? Um, they Nick Szabo. So I know that he gave he named something after him as well. And Nick Szabo at first was very warm towards Ethereum, but over time he started like disagreeing with the way that they were taking things, and and they had a discussion, and might even still be up on Twitter once, where Vitalik was defending. Like Nick says, okay, so what if this and that happens? How are you gonna do it? He's like, well, we can decide to fork or slash them or whatever, right? It's like always a we. It's like Nick goes, but the problem there is the we. Who's we? Right? And when the we is in control of something that isn't physical, then they have more influence over the whole system than they would have otherwise if they had to prove their power using watts. Because then they can just change, like he said, it's a virtual reality. He could just change things to bend to their will. Right? It's like the training room in Matrix. Or maybe like the Matrix.
Okay, how would you? So I was in like a random Viber group chat the other day, and I some like boomer mom. I'm just guessing she's a boomer mom. I was like, "How is Bitcoin real?" And I was like, "It's," and I actually ended up not replying to her because it's like, fucking hell, like, how am I gonna? Like, I'm not even sure what the right words. Is it abstract? Is it tangible? What is it? Not tangible,
That's
but it's
right.
abstract.
What does real mean in this sense? You're right. Is it tangible? Because is she looking for something to hold? But I think she might be talking about a different level. It's like so. There's this one, because I used to listen to a lot of podcasts and read a lot of material about like free will, like free will isn't real, stuff like that. And I could understand what a lot of people, like, their arguments for saying that free will isn't real. But I also appreciated like this one physicist's explanation. He goes, free will is as real as baseball, right? So like, it's by Sean Carroll. He has a blog post. If you want to read it, you can search for that. Like, he essentially says that, yeah, I mean, when you say free will, there are no like free will atoms or anything. Just the same way that there are no baseball atoms or a physical baseball thing, but there is a game with rules, and we describe that with the name baseball. And so he's essentially saying that free will is us being able to make decisions. To the extent that we think we are in control. You know what I mean? So that's what she might mean when she says real, like about Bitcoin. Like, is it real? Like, what do you want to know? Is it how do you know that it won't just disappear? That kind of real, Like, will the data just like, because a lot of people have that issue with digital currency. They just think, oh, what if it disappears? Who will I go to? But they need to understand how the network works and all that. So yeah. So maybe you still don't want to answer.
It kind of makes me wish I had an abstract power to tell her that this is the real physical power, and just trust me.
Just say you went to the UP School of Economics.
Yeah. Exactly.
I am where your taxes went.
Exactly. Like, that would be a good play, but that's the problem, right? Where you have this, where right now the abstract powers are under threat by this physical power, and so the people who would defer to the experts, okay, would defer to the abstract power, right? They would actually end up losing the most because they would get the wrong information.
Wow.
Yeah, well, anyway, that's kind of like why that's. I mean, like it's not like we're. I mean, that's kind of like why we're doing this in a way. I think I like to think, sort of like, I guess I don't know, but yeah, that's. I wish I had an easy answer. Like I wish I had an easy answer for everybody who asks. So is Bitcoin real? How is Bitcoin? No, they don't. So is Bitcoin real? They ask how is it real, right? And my goodness.
Yeah, I think like to be less hand wavy,
Okay.
because my other answer was a bit that
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd get to like I'd ask them what do they mean? Like how is how is do you mean in a sense like how's your peso real? Like how would when you open up Gcash, how is that real? And maybe they can explain it to you. Maybe all they're worried about is like, what if I lose my phone? How can I keep it or whatever?
You know what's funny though? Uh, I have heard the retort that money is real because the government has physical power projection, and like I have heard
The military, right?
exactly, and so I mean, it's just talking about how like earlier we were saying how these two are actually kind of intertwined. It's funny that for some people they still understand this abstract money still in a power projection, like a real physical power projection frame of mind. And it's like, okay, well, if you understand that physical power projection frame of mind for why nukes is why your dollars are valuable, or why the ability to steal from citizens in perpetuity is what makes your dollar valuable, is that power projection, the ability to steal, right? Then it's not that far off a jump to why Bitcoin's also physical power projection, only better. You can throw, I mean, even nukes can't stop Bitcoin, right? So, yeah, it's actually quite powerful.
Yeah, yeah.
Another way I like to describe it or think of it is sort of like, I mean, this whole like defense, this whole power as a defense mechanism. Um, in the Middle Ages, right? Like what kings or dukes? I mean, doesn't have to be king. Most feudal lords, they're dukes or counts or whatever, and they would build um castles to defend their gold, right, and keep them in keeps or whatever. And it's just sort of that, like, hey, okay, there's this really intrinsic thing that has to do with being able to defend yourself and your wealth and your property, um and this whole power projection thing. And when you realize that, okay, we can replace castles which with something which is super labor intensive, super power intensive, and you need, all these resources, you can replace that with um you know a global, in the words of Jason Lowery, a global defense system, right? Like, yeah, I'll take a global defense system over, I mean, castles and nukes.
Yeah, it's like that the energy was spent by the miners. You don't need to do it. Like you have the vault already. Yeah. I mean, we've talked about this for over an hour and a half, but
Yeah.
it's still very like abstract to me sometimes when I think about it.
uh it's um it's very abstract, but I like the big picture aspect of it. um Even if you might not understand all the like intricacies, like um how these nodes are defended or whatever, it's still good to get a big picture of it. It's just another way, maybe another way to understand it. Earlier you said that this is maybe something that's a bit deep, so it's something that, like, maybe you'd only get into it after exploring other parts of Bitcoin first. But
Yeah.
I also think maybe for some people it would if this was their introduction to Bitcoin, I think they might get it.
Mm,
Just from
Sure.
this alone.
maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Sure. Yeah. Right. And it's interesting to see how he has evolved explaining his thesis. Because if you read his earlier stuff, I found them to be less compelling. So he's gotten a lot better. Yeah.
Yeah, he was talking about that. He said, right, he has this grounded theory methodology where he gets his data from just plebs, basically,
Yeah.
instead of publications, experts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Sean, thanks for joining. Well, I think we're wrapping up as well.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Well, we're gonna be. Thanks for joining, everybody. I had it fun as usual. We're gonna be voting on. We're going to be suggesting the next podcast sessions, or the next podcast over the next 2 days, and then we're gonna be voting on it on Saturday. Again,
Steph, why don't you suggest something that I don't know, something you listen to, you find interesting?
Let me look if there's anything.
There's a lot you can choose from.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see.
I would welcome a more. I mean, you're a self-professed newbie, right? So the more,
Yes.
yeah, a topic, a break, I guess, from this very deep, types of discussion.
Okay, I shall try.
All right.
All right.
All right. Thanks for suggesting this, Raman.
Yeah, thanks for suggesting this.
Yeah, sure. Welcome. That's good. Thanks.
Okay.
Night.
Night,
Good
everyone.
night.
Bye.